Newsfirst, NEWSLINE with Faraz Shauketaly.
And a very good evening to you and welcome to Newsline Live. This evening my guest is Dr. Pakiasoti Saravanamuttu. For obvious reasons, we're going to talk UN Geneva. Very good evening to you, Dr. Pakiasoti.
Good evening.
So what's going on in Geneva? What will happen? What is the...
Well, we know that there is a resolution that has been proposed on Sri Lanka, and that will come to a vote round about the 22nd or so of March. In the meantime, we've had the interactive dialogue on the High Commissioner's report, a very stinging report on the situation with regard to human rights, and many states and non-governmental organizations and international organizations did speak in that debate. So it seems like there is sufficient concern to bring international attention to bear on the situation in Sri Lanka, and it looks likely that there will be a resolution.
I was going to ask you whether this resolution is against Sri Lanka.
No, it's not against Sri Lanka. I mean, this is the point. I think the way in which the resolutions in Geneva are presented as being against Sri Lanka. And the very first resolution in 2012 was effectively an appeal to the Sri Lankan government to go ahead and implement the recommendations of the Lessons Learned and Reconciliation Commission.
In basic terms, these resolutions, the 2012 one, 30/1, and any others and so on to come, in simple terms, are they saying, do this or else, or is it, come on chaps, can you up the ante? Can we have some better governance, some better attitudes? Is that what it is?
I think it is much more in the latter category.
Right.
The UN Human Rights Council cannot mandate states to do X and Y.
Right.
They can come up with recommendations. They can ask states to come and report back to the Council in terms of the progress or lack of progress that they've made in respect of human rights protection. But the only UN organ that can mandate states to do anything is, of course, the Security Council.
Yeah.
Yeah. However, by making certain recommendations at the Human Rights Council, then it's left to individual states to decide whether they should take those recommendations further in terms of their bilateral relations.
Now, if we leave Sri Lanka on one side for a momentarily in abeyance, and if we look at, for example, Syria, the Americans have bombed Syria today. Then we look at the perennial and the ongoing problem of the Palestinian people. They really have got, the Palestinian people have had a pretty raw deal for years and years and years. And there are young people there who can't have normal lives, like just having friends and so on. These are all challenges. So where is the UN when it comes to Palestine and so on, and in this case Syria as well? Surely, does Sri Lanka's actions or inaction warrant such attention when there are much more pressing problems going on?
Well, the issue is not choosing between A as opposed to B or C or D.
Yeah.
The question is there a problem in Sri Lanka? And if there is a problem in Sri Lanka, as a body of the international community, does not the United Nations Human Rights Council have a right, a duty, to make comment on the situation in Sri Lanka? With regard to your points about the Palestinians and the Syrians, etc., those are issues that should be taken, and have been taken indeed, to the Security Council and to the General Assembly, where the whole question of as to whether X or Y can intervene should be debated and discussed. But remember, the UN is formed in such a way that you do not go to war against a superpower. That's why you have 5 states that have a veto, and that's like a fuse. If it's going to be war with a superpower, then the fuse comes into play and the whole system is paralyzed. So, the thing about the UN at the end of the day is that you have to try to reconcile the power of the strong with the consent of the weak. And that's the kind of equation that we need to get to.
When we look back on history, and when we remember the actions initiated by the now late Sheikh Ahmed Zaki Yamani in 1973 and the oil embargo and the start of using oil as a powerful tool, and we can argue that that was the catalyst for more fuel-efficient cars and so on and so forth, and today we have, that's another story. But when we look at that and how the Arabs used oil as a weapon, that's one there. But today, when we look at Sri Lanka, do you think that all this whole human rights business is being used as a weapon of sorts?
Well, first of all, with regard to your point about Yamani and the OPEC, the embargo, etc., just remember one thing. The countries worst affected by that were the countries in the global south, Sri Lanka included. The money that the OPEC countries got as a consequence of raising the oil prices, they were banked in the West. The petrodollars flowed back to the West. But leave that aside for the moment. Is this an instrument that has been used against Sri Lanka? No, it's not been used against Sri Lanka. If you look at the resolutions, the argument is, look, if you are a country that requires reconciliation, if you require transitional justice, if you require unity, then you have to do certain things as the institutions and the commissions and all of that you have set up yourself in your own country have recommended. So what we are saying is look, please get on with it. We will give you whatever support we can as far as that's concerned. And at the same time, if we see that there are things that are happening which go against the trend of reconciliation and unity, we are flagging them now.
Sri Lanka's president now and his brother before him have both very categorically said that they are not going to allow any sort of foreign investigation here, that Sri Lanka has its own homegrown system to do whatever. Would you agree that they have done something or they haven't done anything?
Well, if you take, for example, the whole question of accountability. We know the Mirusaville murder case, where Lieutenant, I think he is, or Colonel or whatever, Sergeant Sunil Ratnayake was convicted by every single court in this country. Convicted for the murder of 11 odd people, including the slitting of the throats of 5-year-olds. Now what happened? The president of the country pardoned this man. Now, if that is the justice that people are to expect, what's the point? Look, what is the point? Either we are going to have independent judicial processes that people can have trust and confidence in, or we have to go outside.
Where is the independence of our judiciary in your view?
Well, I mean, the independence of our judiciary, in my view, I think, is sometimes gives the impression of being particularly wanting. Apart from that period in which you had the decisions that were made with regard to that attempted constitutional coup, we seem to be having a record of somewhat executive-friendly judiciary in this country. You see, if we had a judiciary that functioned the way a judiciary is supposed to function, we won't have any talk about reconciliation and transitional justice and going outside. We won't have that issue. Look at the people who are languishing in jail. We say we don't have political prisoners. But there are people who have given the best years of their life in jail. They have not been charged. What do you say to them? I mean, the whole system seems to be rotten. But leave aside the issues that deal with the ethnic conflict. Look at what we heard the other day about the attorney Migara Gunnaratne.
Indeed.
Police brutality. There are special rapporteurs who have come and said that torture is used systematically by the police force in this country.
Of course, Mikara Gunratna, just quick, small correction there, is a final year law student.
Oh, okay.
He was at this police station taking food for a suspect. But that doesn't detract from the fact that he was attacked.
Exactly.
And, okay, there have been supposed action. I say supposed because there is some concern that the person who, the people who've been interdicted or suspended or whatever you want to call it, doesn't include everybody who was part of that attack, warranted or not, on a young man.
Yeah, but you see, but this is the most recent example. I mean, we have Hejaz Hizbullah, who was languishing in jail until...
How much do these actions... how much of these actions will affect and damage Sri Lanka's reputation when it comes to the UN?
Well, as long as the states who have voting rights in the Council know about what the current situation is, what has and has not been done in terms of reconciliation, yes, it must have a bearing on how they will vote. It won't be the only thing that they will vote upon, but it will have a bearing. It will influence their decisions.
So do our politicians, Dr. Saravanamuthu, when they're driving around in their luxury vehicles, they're all luxury. I can't think anyone who goes out in a little compact car. And when they are seated in Parliament, and when they are not throwing chilies at each other and furniture, do they really care about all these lapses in human rights?
No, they don't. They are frogs in a well. They cannot see beyond the limits of that well. You know, look at what we have done with regard to Geneva. I mean, we've annoyed the Indians considerably, and that's probably put it mildly. We've annoyed the Japanese. We've annoyed the United States. We have a foreign policy fiasco on our side. We get up in the United Nations Human Rights Council and defend Eritrea and Syria and countries with horrendous human rights records. Here is a country that had a proud, distinguished record in terms of foreign policy and international relations. That has gone to the dogs. And after the break, let's talk about the real impact on the people and what the people of Sri Lanka can hope to expect if Sri Lanka adheres to these advisories that's coming out of the United Nations. On that note, let's listen to what the headlines have in store for us on the primetime news for this evening.
Newsfirst, Newsline with Faraz Shauketaly.
Welcome back to Newsline Live. I'm in conversation with Dr. Pakisoti Saravanamuthu. Thank you very much for all your messages. What hope does this country offer its future generations if the state seems to be the sponsors of such atrocities, and can't the judiciary itself put its foot down and guide the misguided politicians of this country to toe a just line of service for which they have been mandated?
But ultimately, in a functioning democracy, or even indeed in a formal democracy where we have elections, etc., it is down to the individual citizens to decide who is going to represent them in Parliament and who they are going to elect as president.
But time and time again, the people of this country appear to be electing dysfunctional people who represent them.
So what we have to try to do is to continue to persevere in organizing, in getting the truth out to the people, changing their opinions, changing their perspectives as far as government and governance is concerned. Otherwise, we're going to just keep repeating these problems and keep repeating these same mistakes.
How much of impact is upon our economy, our world trade, and so on, when it comes to these question marks hanging over our head reconciliation, accountability, investigations, alleged war crimes, and so on?
Look, as far as foreign investment is concerned, a basic prerequisite for it is strong and stable government. Now, if you have people marching from, say, like what happened from Pottuvel to Polikandi, and they are in their thousands, that's not stable government.
But isn't a two-third mandate and a thumping majority of the presidential, isn't that strong government?
Yes, but look at that two-thirds mandate. The problems that the government faces at the present moment is from within its own ranks. It's not that the opposition is presenting a great threat to it at the present moment. It's from within its own ranks. And the president, who doesn't have a political party, who doesn't have any political experience as such, is isolated. And that isolation is now in danger of extending to the country at large, internationally as well.
It's been a lot of talk from all these international watchdogs, agencies like the UN and so on and so forth. But in real terms, the people of Sri Lanka, the people of Palestine, the people of Syria, and the people wherever these various atrocities are going on. In Zimbabwe, we had so many very high levels of brutality against its people there. And the list goes on. I haven't even mentioned any of South America and so on. So what do the people do? Do they continue to have hope in this talk, or do they all, including the people in Palestine, Syria, Sri Lanka, in the north, the displaced people in Puntland area, the people who made homeless, some of them still homeless after the tsunami in the south of our country, the estate workers in the hills. Do we all sit down and put our faith in God and say, please help us?
No, we don't. And if you look at the South American examples, the Latin American examples, they changed things. They changed. They got rid of their dictators. They brought in democratic governments. And everything is not perfect. But it's certainly a change from the miserable situation that there was under dictatorships. So it is a question of the population getting together, organizing, spreading that message, coming up with candidates who they can trust, and proceeding in that way as far as the political process is concerned. It's going to take time. It's not going to happen overnight. But perseverance is important. Things don't remain the same as such. Things change. And they must be changed for the better.
You talk of perseverance. I'm talking to you about the resilience. Let's say the people affected by the war, the people affected by the tsunami, the people displaced who are still living in various places of Puntland. They're resilient, yes, because they are existing. They're just existing. So what about them? How do we get them out of their rut? Has Sri Lanka got the money to make financial reparations, for example?
Well, the issue with regard to the government as far as reparations is concerned is they have to ask themselves, what are their priorities? Is reparations a priority? And if it is, allocate money towards it. If you look at our budget, what seems to be our priority? The security forces, the defense budget. So, if we are really serious about this, we're going to sit down and ask ourselves, what does this country need? What is the kind of country that we want to live in? And what, therefore, does a government have to do?
If we do an audit on the defense budget, then there'll be lots of heads rolling because of what happened at Easter.
And is Easter Sunday to be unaccounted for? Look, there are lots of things that have happened in the politics of this country over the last 3 decades or whatever, and the argument has been put forward is that we really don't know what happened because there is another side to the story. And that's where the truth lies.
In your experience, being with the Center for Policy Alternatives and so on and so forth, what are the chances of real progress? in terms of accountability, reconciliation, and ultimately a better quality of life for all our people?
Well, I think the chances at the present moment, in terms of what we have in this country, as far as reconciliation is concerned, are not particularly good. Because what we have done is that we have sustained the roots of conflict. We have reproduced new ones. And therefore, we are heading towards a situation in which the majority community in this country has been told, you're under siege and only we can protect you. And that's the claim to power, as it were, on the part of the current regime. But things will change. Things will change as long as the two-thirds majority of that constituency that voted in this government realize that, look, they're not fulfilling their promise. Their performance is far below what they promise, and therefore we need to give others a chance. And hopefully the others will realize that in politics, in democratic politics, being in the opposition is about providing a constructive alternative
But this
to
opposition,
those in power.
apart from that march from one side of the country to the other, the opposition seems to be fractured, divided, acting in their own partisan
Well,
interests.
hopefully they will come to their senses. Hopefully they will come.
We had all those Muslim MPs voting for the 20th Amendment.
Absolutely.
Disgraceful.
Absolutely
disgraceful.
But leave the Muslim MPs aside for the moment. There is an opposition. There is the SJB. They have to get their act together, take the message to the people.
They've done pretty well so far with 52, 54 members.
Well, the 52, 54 members, yes, they got that in the general election. But we have to get much more than that. We have to get at least another 52 or 54 more.
Do you think
they have to provide an alternative idea of what Sri Lanka should
Why
be?
aren't all the other opposition people joining together, like the TNA and the other smaller parties, joining this JB and keeping ideology on hold and fighting the real problem?
I don't think they have to formally join the SJB. What is interesting is that the Pottuvillu to Polikandi march, you had for the first time, arguably in probably 50 years, the Tamils from the north, from the east, from the upcountry, as well as the Muslims, get together and go on this march for those 10 demands and the 4 ancillary demands that they had.
Do you think do you think that kind of thing will further put the fear of God in the powers that be and make them retreat even further under the sand and say, no, we're not going to do anything, and be stubborn about reconciliation and everything else?
Well, that seems to be what they're doing. And we do know that governments in the past that have taken that stand have only facilitated bloodshed in the future.
When do you think the next bit of bloodshed will come?
I don't know. I'm not a astrologer, a soothsayer or whatever. But if you look at Sri Lanka, apart from the north and east and the possibilities of the conflict, etc., erupting there are issues in the south of the country which could lead to an eruption, hopefully, that won't result in violence. If the institutions and the processes of government in the entire country are being corrupted, then we are going to face a breakdown, a decrepitude of government and governance.
Final question as we come to an end. How long do you think that this government are going to blag their way with the international community?
Well, I think the economy is going to be tremendously important. You know, when the Rajapaksa constituency realize that on the economic front, all the promises of the vistas of splendor and prosperity were just made to win an election, and that the performance doesn't measure up, then I think things will start changing, perhaps.
Dr. Pakiasoti Saramanuthu, thank you very much for being on Newsline Live. Now, the Newsline Live feels for all those people all over the world who are facing their own challenges. I mentioned the people of Palestine, I mentioned Syria, Sri Lanka, of course, our own, Myanmar, all over the place. Newsline Live, our group, we feel for each and every one of them. Take care, have a great evening ahead of you, and as always, God bless you. It's now time for the Prime Time.